I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine that you want to learn how to knit a beanie. You're tired of spending your hard-earned dollars on keeping your head warm. It's time to free yourself from the shackles of consumerism and take action. So what would we do in today's day and age? You'd probably go onto the internet and hit up Google or YouTube for the information you seek, and you'd be on your way to a cozy head. Now let's imagine the same thing again, but let's jump back 40 years to the 80s. You want to learn how to knit a beanie. What would you do first? Well, one path would be to jump on your BMX and go to a library or bookstore and find an instructional book on learning to knit and start there. Simple. You have easy access to the information you seek and are able to find it and learn it yourself. You could even get multiple books and check that their instructions match, or pick between different methods to see what suits you best. Your easy access to multiple different sources of information allows you to confirm the validity of what you've discovered. Now let's jump back even further. Let's say about 700 years to the 1300s. You want to learn to knit a beanie. What do? You aren't wealthy, so you have no access to books, which are an extremely rare luxury item. There are certainly no computers. The only way you can learn this is by finding someone who knows how and asking them to teach you. Now the tricky thing here is you have no way to check that what they are teaching you is right. You have no access to any other information on this topic. They may not even know how to knit at all. So then imagine that in this period, someone invented a device that allowed for the fast, perfectly replicated printing of words on paper, that allowed for books and pamphlets to become cheap and easily accessible, and now suddenly a world of information was available to you. And you discovered that not only had your knitting teacher been lying to you and using you to knit a sweater for her dog, but that the leaders in your community had been lying too about all sorts of other things. And that it turns out your king isn't a god like he claims, just an insecure, power-hungry man. Now you can begin to imagine the impact of the printing press when it was invented in Germany in 1439 and completely changed the world. It was revolutionary in the truest sense of the word. This sounds like a process worth discussing. Johannes Gutenberg is generally credited with the invention of the printing press in 1439 in Germany. And yes, he is rightly celebrated because it was his invention that spawned a complete revolution in Europe and in turn completely changed the Western world. However, his famous Gutenberg Bible was not the first printed book, nor was he even the first to print. Paper was invented in China, so it's only fitting that it was also the people of China who were the first to invent printing, using a process called woodblock printing. A process that seems to have been used in China even before 220 CE, over 1200 years before Gutenberg. This process involved getting a flat surface of wood and very carefully carving it out so that the only remaining surfaces at the original flat level are in the shapes you'd like to print. Ink is applied, which doesn't touch the carved away recesses, only the remaining uppermost surfaces. Then the wood is pressed down on either paper or textiles, and you have a print. And now that block can be used over and over again to produce the exact same print as many times as you need. While the carving process was a laborious and highly skilled task, you need only do it once. This was huge, and over the next 1,000 years, this led to an explosion in the printing and availability of books in China that long predated the same in Europe. Now, if you know some of the history of the printing press, you may argue that that's all well and good, but it was Gutenberg who invented the movable type process, whereby he molded metal tiles of each letter needed that could then be laid out and arranged to spell any word, thus removing the laborious process of carving out each character all over again for each new print. Well, 400 years before Gutenberg's press, a Chinese artisan and engineer named Bi Sheng made the world's first movable type system, crafting characters out of clay. The only limitation to this technique was the thousands of different characters in the Chinese alphabet, which led to the woodblock process still holding prominence. It was still often more efficient to carve the character you wanted, especially for a skilled artisan, rather than search through such a deep library of characters. This is where Gutenberg had an advantage. Working with the Latin alphabet, he would only need around 24 different characters, making the movable type system the perfect process to take over the European world. Gutenberg combined the process of the mechanical press used widely in wine and olive oil production in the Mediterranean with the principles of block printing adapted to use movable type. The type would be laid out on a wooden frame with ink applied, and then a heavy wooden screw would be turned to apply even flat pressure to a piece of paper, pressing it into the inked type. This process could produce 250 one-sided printed sheets per hour, and as the process was refined and perfected, that number rose to 8,000 sheets per hour by the mid-19th century. And just like that, a revolution in literacy and education for the public began, which birthed a reformation of religion and governments and the way we saw our world. Scientists, leaders, artists, revolutionaries, and storytellers could all now share their work easily and widely, and this led to a vast expansion in human consciousness. So the next time you have a moment where you want to learn something, and you jump onto your phone and look it up in seconds, pause and consider that this freedom to access knowledge is part of a process that began thousands of years ago in China with carving shapes into wood. The explosive potential in humankind sharing our thoughts and ideas to a wide audience lay dormant for so long, until it was paired with the right process. By the 1800s, we had the printed word easily and widely accessible. So what was the next step in refining the process of how we communicate? It wasn't about breadth of reach anymore, but now speed. How do we communicate over vast distances beyond sight or hearing, but quickly? And that's what we'll be getting into next time, as we uncover yet another process that is part of the larger, never-ending process that we call communication.